Was there an ancient cover-up that successfully hid several Jewish feasts so effectively that they are still not found on the current Orthodox Judaism calendar? Would it shock you to find out that these hidden Jewish feasts directly relate to end times Bible prophecy? Our guest today will explain right now. Welcome, everybody, to Skywatch Television. I'm Joe Horn. We continue week 3 of a fascinating discussion that we started on the 2 books, The Lost Prophecies of Qumran by Josh Peck, and also Dr. Ken Johnson's new book, The Ancient Mysteries of the Essenes, which is actually more than 1 volume squeezed into just 1 book. And we're going to be talking about both of these today. If you missed last week, you've got to go back to the archives and check them out. We've been talking about Qumran, the Essenes, who they were, and why it is so important. If Christians want to understand Bible prophecy and what's unfolding around the world today, that they take a look at both of these fascinating works. They're forthcoming. They're totally loaded, cover to cover. But first, let me introduce who's on deck. With a doctorate in theology from Christian College of Texas, he's the author of over 20 books related to biblical and extra-biblical texts. The CEO of BibleFacts.org. Welcome back once again, Dr. Ken Johnson. Author of numerous best-selling books and the writer, editor, and director of the blockbuster film Silent Cry, The Darker Side of Trafficking, Josh Peck.
Thanks for having me.
Guys, as always, we have so much ground to cover. I want to start this week with you, Dr. Ken. For those that are just joining this loaded series, jam-packed, who are not familiar with the Dead Sea Scrolls, as I've mentioned before, this is not material that a lot of modern churches cover, talking about the Essenes and the calendar and so forth.
Yeah.
Talk to us about the Dead Sea Scrolls and what is the nature of that work and why is it so important to you?
Well, basically, we understand from the New Testament Jesus came, died for our sins, etc. We understand that the Pharisees and the Sadducees taught something else and were anti-Messiah. There was an apostasy.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't in effect at the close of the Old Testament canon, but it was in effect at the beginning of the New, and so something happened in those 400 silent years. And they're called the 400 silent years because we have almost no data on them. Because somebody deliberately erased the data. And now with the Dead Sea Scrolls coming out, we have that information back. Wow. Isaiah 29 actually prophesied that the Dead Sea Scrolls would come back when Israel comes back the second time, which is what happened. Mm-hmm. And so we're supposed to read them. And now we read them and we find out all this information of a cover-up.
Is that the reason that these scrolls were taken by the Essenes and hidden away inside of these caves? Was that an effort to preserve them for time because there was this concerted effort to kind of stamp out what it was they were doing and teaching, you think?
I believe so, because they talked about all the prophecies going in cycles. There's an apostasy at the end of each age. And so they had the temple library. Mm-hmm. They had other copies of it, so they would leave it for future generations.
Mm-hmm. I want to switch gears briefly because we have so much to cover, Josh. The Jewish feasts. Mm-hmm. Do the Dead Sea Scrolls address any of this?
Yeah, there's actually extra Jewish feasts. Because of this cover-up, there's been a lot lost to us up until just recently. So what most people are familiar with are the 7 Jewish feasts.
Okay.
And even prophetically speaking, we know that Jesus fulfilled a lot of those feasts, actually all of them in his earthly ministry. Now, there's still some fall feasts that many people speculate might be fulfilled at his second coming. But there's actually some hidden, you could call them summer feasts.
Okay.
There's extra spring feasts. So there's the Feast of New Wine, the Feast of New Oil. These come after Pentecost. And what's really interesting, there's a whole story with the Feast of New Wine that actually might show up in the Bible during Jesus' ministry, and it might help us explain what these feasts might represent, even prophetically. So the Feast of New Wine actually shows up in the wedding of Cana. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. Feast of New Wine is supposed to be on the 3rd of Av. And Jesus shows up at a wedding. And the Feast of New Wine is also connected with weddings, just like we usually have a June wedding.
Okay.
That was a normal custom at that time, and there's a lot more to the story. But basically, he shows up at the wedding of Cana, and John chapter 2 says it's on the 3rd of the month. So we're actually told it's the 3rd of Av. It's the festival of new wine. And they run out of wine, so he changes the water into wine, which is
Okay.
connected with that festival. And that's something you totally lose if you don't know the calendar. But again, if you
Gotcha.
know the calendar, you're just reading John, third of the month, wine. Oh, I get it. I know where we're at.
Okay.
And what's great too is the four main festivals. You got new wine, new oil, barley, and wheat. Those show up all in conjunction with each other in the Old and the New Testament all over the place. And it's like once you
Okay.
understand what the feasts are, or at least what we can piece together today about them and understand where they fall on the calendar, all throughout the Old Testament, especially in prophecy, you see wheat, barley, wine, and oil put together all the time. Even there's a famous Revelation passage about hurt not the oil and the wine. So there's something there. There's
Right.
something prophetically speaking to these feasts. And if we could get to the point where we understood the rituals and knew exactly what they did, just like with Passover, that's
Right.
very prophetic. Well, these feasts are probably just as prophetic. We're just piecing together what the rituals are. So a lot of that is in our books.
Why are there different feasts on the Essene calendar and the current Orthodox Judaism calendar? It makes me wonder if there wasn't a cover-up at some point in the ancient past.
Yeah, according to many sources, there's a book called the Seder Olam, which gives chronology that actually says everybody knows what's going on.
Okay.
But the Messiah came and was rejected, and there was this rabbi named Yoshi that deliberately tried to change how the prophecies work
Okay.
to change the timeline.
Okay.
For instance, we talk about the year 6000 as maybe being the second coming. On the current Jewish calendar, that's over 218 years away. Somehow I think there's a problem with that,
Yeah.
On the Essene calendar, it's 54 years away, and that's still kind of lengthy for me, but you can kind of see the difference. So they mention that kind of stuff. And what's really interesting is the ancient ones had a Sabbath,
Okay.
and they also had the time of the first day of the week, which was the Lord's Day, where you would train your disciples. The school of the prophets did.
Okay.
And that's been totally obliterated because we had the festival of first fruits, and then 50 days later, Pentecost. And what we didn't realize is that there's 4 first fruit festivals. What we call first fruits is barley, Pentecost wheat, and then there's wine and oil, which is grapes and olives. All of these are exactly 50 days apart. They all fall on a Sunday. We're told that these are connected with the age of grace, the next age to come. But what happens is they deliberately get rid of oil and wine for a specific reason, and instead of saying first fruits is the day after the weekly Sabbath, they say it's the day after the high Sabbath. Boom. All Sunday festivals are gone then. And now we
Okay.
have this big debate about, well, you changed it to Sunday. You shouldn't have done that. You
Right.
should keep the Sabbath. No, we should be understanding all of it.
A question, I guess, for the viewer that they may be considering at this point, especially if they attend, a lot of church today, the way that church is done. They may be asking, Dr. Ken, why dig so deeply into the kinds of details that you two have done to pick apart the Essenes and these various calendars? And, I get Bible prophecy at some point, but, we're probably going to be raptured out of this at some point. Why do I need to worry about the chronology of the timeline? I mean, God's going to take care of all this. Why should I care about this level of research into these matters, in your view?
Well, for the average person, you're not a priest doing sacrifices in a temple.
Okay.
But then let's say that you get a job offer, and the offer is in Damascus, Syria. You know about Isaiah 19, right? I would advise you not to take the job. Okay? There are other prophecies and other historical data in here
Right.
that would help us understand that better. There are other places I would recommend you not take a job. And I think it's important for us to know those kind of things.
Well, and also I'd add to that too that for some reason God has decided that now is the time before any kind of rapture, before the tribulation. Now is the time for Christians to have this information.
Right.
Yes.
I don't know exactly why specifically, but I think something big is ahead of us, and
Sure.
we need to know this today to prepare for it.
And
Well,
you-
and also we're human. You look again at the end of World War II, Nazi Germany, when the Holocaust was unveiled for all of the world to see the atrocities,
Yep.
the death camps, Dachau, Auschwitz, all of that. It lit a fire of support. The Zionist movement was revived
Yeah.
following World War II when people saw how the Jews were being persecuted. But what happened in the church? The church at that time was fairly asleep. like
Yeah.
it is
Right.
today.
Yeah.
Right.
And yet a few people came along after the Balfour Declaration, and Israel was revived as a nation. And they saw that as the fulfillment of the fig tree prophecy.
Yes.
In the Bible,
Yep.
it says, when you see the budding of the fig tree, this generation will not pass away until all things are fulfilled. That lit such a fire in the church at that time. And
Right.
of course, they were translating the age of a generation as 40 years,
Right.
so 1948. Wow.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
what was that book that came out? 88 Reasons Why the
yeah.
Lord Will Return in 1988. And of course, you know, for the viewer, there's other places in the Bible that imply it could be 70 years, 80
Yeah,
years, something
yeah.
like that. But the point is, what it did to the church, I think, gives us a responsibility to discuss this kind of information.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to say there could be very strong prophetic implications in what the ancient Essenes had to say, and we should pay attention to their calendar
Yes.
because if they got it right the first time around,
Right.
nailing down literally the year that the Messiah would show up,
Right.
be crucified, would die for our sins, if they got all of that right, and now they're pointing to the year 2025 as the start of the final age of man, should we pay attention to what
Oh,
they
yeah.
have to say?
Well, and there's-
it could explain an awful lot about what's going on in our world
It
today.
does, and that's the real life application of this. There is an apostasy right now. You could think of it as a spiritual disease all over the earth.
Right.
Yeah.
At the end of the last age, that apostasy in Israel started a couple of hundred years before Jesus was born. So it had a couple of hundred years to really, but it was Israel. So now the apostasy, that you could think of that as a shadow or an example of what we're dealing with now. Now it's worldwide. The apostasy hit a couple hundred years ago. I mean, just think about how different life was in, say, the 1800s as opposed to now. I mean, why now all of a sudden do we have all this extra technology and innovation? And, you know, why didn't the
Right.
ancient Greeks have an industrial revolution?
Right.
They could have. They had the materials.
Right.
But it's because I think it's part of this apostasy. Look at how Satan has used all the tools available to us now to deceive people. Now, Christians have been able to use those tools for really good things, too. We can go witness to anybody in the world now from the comfort of our own home. So
Right.
there's good things, too. But knowing that there is an apostasy active right now, we as Christians need to know that, because the apostasy is not, in my opinion, it's not strictly theology based, as in you believe this, I believe that, so you're wrong,
apostate.
you're an apostate. The apostasy is the attitude we have against our brothers and sisters. So at the apostasy in Israel, at the end of the age of Torah, you had Jewish people were killing their Jewish brothers and sisters.
Right.
Right.
Well, here with Christianity, think about all the fighting over
Exactly.
minor
That's
issues.
exactly where my head went.
It's
just
the
now.
apostasy.
Right.
So we as
Yes.
Christians need to understand what it is so we don't accidentally engage
and
in it.
history is cyclical.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so now what we see is the same spirit, the same attitude. Paul said there are many antichrists in the world. There's always this Hitler-like thing
Yes.
that wants to come into the world. But Jesus basically predicted that what happened with the persecution of the Essenes is going to happen
Coming
again
again.
when he says that the day is going to come when those who put you to death, those
Right.
who kill you,
Yes.
are going to believe that they are serving God. Now, you fast forward to today. So many things, even like getting a vaccination or whatever.
Yeah.
And look at how many people in the Christian community, and by the way, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I'm not saying get vaccinated or don't get vaccinated. This isn't about that. It's the sentiment, even within religion and
Yes.
Christianity
It's
today,
the attitude behind
that
it.
you're going
Yes.
to do what we tell you to do, or we would be willing to fulfill the prophecy of Jesus
Yeah.
Right.
and literally put you into a camp somewhere,
Yeah.
separate you from the rest
Right.
of humanity.
Yeah.
I just think this is very much what Nita foresaw many, many years ago in how the Antichrist system would come to play, the mark of the beast, all of that. But it does seem like we're marching towards the same period. And
Yeah.
this year 2025 gets me because it's not just Bible prophets. It's not just Tom Horn's Zeitgeist 2025.
Secular
right?
experts.
Yeah, secular
right.
experts. Strauss and Howe,
Yeah.
celebrated historians, 25 years ago,
Yes.
wrote their book, The Fourth Turning, but they marked the year 2025
Yeah.
for the likely time in which the emergence of a worldwide totalitarianistic
Right.
government would emerge on the world scene. The highest levels of intelligence in the United States and 17 other nations actually over a decade ago, writing the report Global Governance 2025,
Right.
in which they saw by that year specifically the rise of a worldwide global government. So Yeah, secular researchers, historians seem to agree with the Essenes. The final
Yes.
age of man begins in
Yes.
2025. If the church could somehow do what the church did following World War II and allow this to inflame their passion for the preaching of the gospel,
Bingo.
if they could say, look, it does appear that we are marching down now towards the end of humanity. We don't have a lot of time. Let's become energetic
Bingo.
Yeah.
about
Right.
the preaching of the gospel. That's
Right.
how the first
Amen.
century was
Yes.
turned around. That's
Right.
how it could be turned
Amen.
around now.
I want to deal with something that one of the guests in studio mentioned last week during the break, because it fits right in with what we're talking about now. You're talking about neighbors being instructed to turn in neighbors.
Yeah.
Right.
For personal decision-making having to do with health care and things that have never been so publicly exploited.
Right.
You feel all the coercion to make specific decisions based on your workplaces now.
Yeah.
Requiring you to make certain health care decisions that are compliant with their policies. When this is, in my lifetime at least, I've not in this country seen this massive
Right.
push for this kind of stuff. But here's the deal. If you pit red team versus blue team, there's always going to be fighting, right?
Yeah.
But what I think I've seen over the last year, and this is just my view, is they've used things like healthcare now and religion now to even begin to kind of further fragment red team.
Yeah.
So now you've got subdivisions of both cultures. You've got what
Yes.
people have labeled the left, and then the radical left, and then the Marxist socialist left, and then same thing on the right. You've got conservatives, and then conservative Christians, and then right-wing radicals, and then there's subcategory.
You know, that happened with the
Yeah.
Essenes too.
But that's what I'm getting at. So my point is, one of our guests talked about, could you please elaborate, give us some thoughts on what Christians can do to confront what they believe in our lifetime could be imminent persecution.
Yeah. Well, first off, we need to realize that we can't control anybody else's actions. So that takes some of the, as Christians, we feel responsible to the people that we talk to and try to preach the gospel. And then, they don't accept it and we feel bad about that. We, feel kind of like personally responsible. Knowing what the apostasy is, knowing the times that we're living in, it helps kind of take some of that personal responsibility that it's not really about us. We're just living in these times.
Right.
And we're instructed to do the things that Jesus told us to do. So in understanding that context, it really helps explain the times that we're living in, things that we have to deal with even day to day. And like I mentioned, even in the Essenes, as awesome and great as the Essenes were, they weren't perfect. They had factions that broke off in their own group. So, there were the main group of believers,
Right.
and they were fine. But they had 3 or 4 different factions, of heretical factions. And it's really interesting because in Christianity today, we actually see these come up again.
Yeah, Joe, I know we got to go to a break, and I know we're also going to run out of time. But there's another topic here I'd really love to hear Dr. Johnson talk about, and that is the School of the Prophets.
Yeah.
Who was running that, and what does that have to do with
Right.
our discussion today?
We will pick it up right there when we come back on the other side of this break. We want to make sure that you know how to get a copy of both of these incredible works. We'll be right back.
Call now and take advantage of Skywatch TV's most groundbreaking deal of the year. With the rediscovery of the ancient prophecies from a mysterious group of prophets and scribes hundreds of years before Christ, your understanding of end times prophecy and the final age of man is about to be forever changed. In Josh Peck's new book, The Lost Prophecies of Qumran, the veil is lifted as you discover how much of what you've been taught about Israel in the first century is incomplete. Shockingly, there were Jewish believers who knew exactly what to expect from the coming Messiah. That he would be God in the flesh, would die for our sins, and even the date of his first arrival. In Josh Peck's new book, The Lost Prophecies of Qumran, you will discover lost prophecies only recently discovered in the Dead Sea Scrolls about the time we are now living in, how the enigmatic group known as the Essenes formed and what influence they had on the New Testament, what hidden feasts and festivals the Essenes celebrated, and what messages the group left behind for believers living in the present age, how the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation fit within the Essene timetable, and how an ancient Jewish calendar actually predicts the prophetic significance of the year 2025. But that's not all. For the first time ever, you'll also receive Dr. Ken Johnson's massive 3-book collection entitled The Ancient Mysteries of the Essenes, where Dr. Johnson compiles 3 of his most groundbreaking research studies on the Dead Sea Scrolls into one massive collection. In Book 1, the ancient Dead Sea Scrolls calendar and the prophecies it reveals. You will discover the secrets of the mysterious 364-day calendar used by the ancients since the time of creation and how it has been hidden until now for the appointed time. In Book 2, Ancient Testimonies of the Patriarchs, Autobiographies from the Dead Sea Scrolls, you will hear the previously hidden prophetic texts of such patriarchs as Enos, grandson of Adam, Lamech, father of Noah, Amram, father of Moses and Aaron, and even Enoch from the Book of Enoch fame. And in the most shocking revelation yet, Book 3, The Ancient Order of Melchizedek, you will learn astonishing facts about the enigmatic priest Melchizedek, such as why his priesthood was and is different from that of Levi, why the Messiah was ordained after the order of Melchizedek, and how the facts surrounding this mysterious order dramatically affect the theology and practical applications of our Christian walk today. This collection is an absolute necessity for any researcher's library, and for those who want to fully step into the minds of the ancients and see the Dead Sea Scrolls like they never have before. Now you can get this incredible collection for your donation of only $35 plus shipping and handling. So don't miss out on Skywatch TV's most groundbreaking deal of the year, the Lost Prophecies and Ancient Mysteries collection. Available now at skywatchtvstore.com. Order now or call 1-844-750-4985.
Welcome back to Skywatch Television. I'm Joe Horn. We're going to continue our discussion on the two books, The Lost Prophecies of Qumran and The Ancient Mysteries of the Essenes. A couple of amazing gentlemen. We're about to wrap up this 4-week series. But before we run out of time, Dr. Ken Johnson, what was the School of the Prophets and who was running it during the time of Jesus? Because I know right before the break, Tom really wanted to hit that, but we had to go.
Okay, well, real briefly, again, we had a Melchizedekian priesthood, which was a prophet, king, priest. And when that was broke up, the School of the Prophets formed for keeping all the records of the prophets. And it's not just the biblical ones, but all of the ancient histories, the temple library. So this continued for a long time. We hear about Elijah running the School of the Prophets and things like that. We have an actual record by Hippolytus giving us the School of the Prophets from the time of Moses all the way up to Christian times.
Which I include that in my book as an appendix at the end so people can read through that actual document.
The
That's
Lost
very cool.
Prophecies of Qumran.
Yeah, I have several of those documents are in that book.
So we have John the Baptist's father, and then John the Baptist,
Okay.
and then it gets turned over to Agabus, and we know him from the New Testament, and then finally Quintinius and a few others. But it's interesting to see how that works. And there's actually the people that didn't follow Messiah tried to continue the School of the Prophets from John the Baptist's circle, and that's where we see Simon Magus from the book of Acts and the start of the Gnostic groups. And so we have a false satanic School of the Prophets. And we see the same thing today. If you go online and look up Essenes, there'll be 2 or 3 people talking about the Essenes, and a ton of people talking about who knows what.
New Age, just
New
weird
Age
stuff. Yeah. Well, and Annas and Caiaphas even show up in that list too, and it explains how they got to their position.
Now, but what does that mean? The School of the Prophets, is this where people went to learn how to prophesy?
It's the place you go to learn to study prophecy. You have to know the calendar. You have to know the basic concept of Messiah.
So it's like a theology school,
Yeah, kind of
basically,
like a theology
or
school
seminary.
for prophets.
Gotcha.
And then if you are anointed by the Holy Spirit, you may become a prophet. The cool thing about it is Sadducees would only work with Sadducees and Pharisees would only work with Jews. An Essene would say, do you want to study prophecy? You're a man, you're a woman, you're Gentile, whatever. Let's have lunch.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Let's talk about
That's
Messiah.
very cool.
Yeah, they were welcoming Gentiles in before.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
before
it's pretty amazing.
For people that are joining the program, though, and they did not see last week, Josh, the Essenes, because we've dropped that name multiple times in this episode, but if somebody's still out there lost, who were they and why do we keep referencing them?
Right.
Very quickly, maybe just recap who they were and how accurate they were at making prophetic
It was
predictions.
a third major Jewish faction during the time of Jesus. So we know about the Pharisees and Sadducees. We read about those in the New Testament. We don't see the word Essene in the New Testament, but the Essenes do show up from time to time. They're usually the ones that are accepting Jesus, whereas usually the Pharisees and Sadducees are arguing. So that's kind of how you can tell. But the Essenes were the third major part. A lot of their history has been kind of covered up throughout the past 2,000 years. So what our books do is try to piece that back together to find out what our heritage as Christians is. Because again, the Essenes were the ones that really accepted Jesus, so we as Christians come from the Essenes. That's our heritage, as well as Jewish people heritage as well. That's really the start of the one new man kind of thing. So it's important for us to know that. It tells us who we are and how we came to be where we are today in history.
What
Well,
about
what I love about both of your books is there's also this level of scholarship. In other words, you're saying you're piecing together this puzzle to explain what the community of the Essenes were, what their role in the New Testament was, in the life of John the Baptist, people like that. But it's not just wild speculation.
No.
It's not like, well, I wonder who these people were.
No.
Well, maybe it was this, that.
No, there's no
a
guesswork.
lot of scholarship. There's recent archaeological discoveries. There's new scrolls that are being discovered. That's how actually the calendar all got pieced together. But just one more quick thing back to the school of the prophets.
Yeah.
We know that in the New Testament there are the so-called missing years of Jesus, right?
Yes.
Did he come over here to help Joseph Smith during that time form the Church of Mormon? Or what was going on? Some people say that during that period of time, to his own mom, don't you know that I should be about my father's business? That during his missing years, he had gone into Qumran, and there he was being taught by the Essenes. Now, I asked Dr. Michael Heiser when he was here about that. He said, well, I know that he knew who the Essenes were, and if he was there, it would have been him teaching the Essenes.
Right.
And you said, you actually told me that before Heiser told me that, so that was a common sentiment there, that he would have been there teaching them, right?
Right.
So what can you tell me about that? Jesus is gone. He's over there talking with the Essenes at the School of Prophecy. Yeah, you got it right, boys. I'm here. And then he comes back, and the scribes and Pharisees are blown away by the level of knowledge of this young man.
Yeah.
Yeah, we actually have a document, a Dead Sea Scroll, that tells us that Messiah was teaching the Essenes in Qumran on a Yom Kippur. And one of the a group of people from the temple in Jerusalem, along with the high priest, came to arrest him. Now, number one, that wouldn't happen on a Yom Kippur.
Okay.
So that tells us, number two, they had two separate calendars.
Right.
So there's a lot of internal evidence for that. But they actually tried to arrest him, and of course it didn't fly. And there's a whole story behind this in the scrolls, which is really interesting. But I would want to say that the word Essene is not mentioned in the New Testament, but the Essenes called themselves Yahad, which means the ones of Yah or God. And they were called the Way. And the Way was a sect mentioned by Paul, and he said he followed the Way, which is the way of the ancients. And what's interesting about that is the word Zodi means way, like a road or something in Greek, but Zodi is very similar to Zadok, which is the Zadok priests. And so that's how the Way became a national a name for them. So we have internal evidence all over.
So this reference to the Way indicates that even people like Paul and others were heavily influenced by the teaching of the Essenes.
More than that,
Yes.
he likely converted to the Essenes, because he goes on in the book of Acts. You can piece all this together. He talks about how he spent 3 years there, 3 years there. When you piece all that together, especially the 3-year thing, that's how long it took to become an Essene. And we learned that not only from Dead Sea Scrolls, but outside sources too, like Josephus talks about that. So when you put all that together, it really looks like Paul did not go to Damascus, Syria, but rather Damascus, Qumran, because they called their settlement Damascus.
Oh, so on the road to Damascus
That's
for this
Qumran.
revelation?
Most likely, I think that's most likely. There's reason to think that, and I lay it all out in the book and the reasons why. And there could be more to that story that we just don't know. But according to our current understanding, it seems like Paul was going to Qumran to persecute Christians, which makes a lot more sense than Syria anyway. Think about who the temple authority, who would they have authority over? Syria, Damascus, or Syria, or Damascus, Qumran. When you read the account, and I go through it in the book and explain how all this works, it really seems like Paul discovered, Messiah, and converted to the Essene way of kind of doing Jewishness, if you could call it that.
Gentlemen, there's never enough time, but never fear. That's why they're coming back next week. Our guests are going to return to reveal how all of this, the Essenes, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the ages of man, all point toward end times biblical prophecy and the second coming of our Savior to usher in his kingdom age. You don't want to miss it. For everybody in studio, Dr. Ken Johnson, Josh Peck, thanks again, guys, for coming back.
Absolutely.
Keep your eyes on the prize, which is Jesus Christ. We'll be back.